Hello and welcome to this season wrap-up episode of What I Did Next from A&T Media. I'm Chirag Desai and taking over hosting duties today from your host, Malak Fuad, who's also with me today.
Hi, Chirag. It's nice to be in the guest seat for a change.
It's been interesting, right? I mean, we do this at the end of every season, which is lovely. It also means that we've come to the end of season 4.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the speed of all of this. First of all, that we are in season 4. And that we're at the end of it. It just seems like yesterday that we began the podcast. This particular season has been a little bit challenging, let's say, a bit more than usual. How are you feeling about it, Chirag? You must be pretty tired.
I like how you said, a bit
Yeah,
challenging. So
yeah.
I appreciate you using your
Yeah.
words very
Very
carefully.
carefully.
It's been very different. So normally, just to put that in context, we generally work quite ahead of schedule. We're kind of, working a few episodes ahead in terms of our production and getting everything together. This season was challenging on that front, especially because I think we had one of those summers after many years, and definitely the first time since we launched the show, where it was an actual summer. People were traveling, everybody was away. So actually booking guests and getting them to record with us didn't really happen at the frequency we would have liked over the summer. And so that obviously just changed the schedule. And that's not counting the fact that we had some postponements and some rejig of the schedule itself, right? So
Yeah, we had some postponements, some cancellations. We had a lot of last-minute deadlines. We had some tech issues, which had never happened before on my end. So we had to make quite a difficult call, actually, of saying, no, we're not going to air it as it is, and we are hopefully going to have a redo of that in the next couple of months and bring that to our audience. So that was relatively challenging, and I feel as well that we had a more intense social media campaign. I'm not sure if we actually did or if it just felt like that, but I think it was very, very positive because there was a lot more engagement from the audience. From On the social media side, I think we expanded our reach quite significantly. But it was definitely a season where we were down to the wire.
definitely, and I think that was a part of why the social media side felt more intense as well. I think because it was normally we're figuring out clips and we're figuring out promotional things far earlier than we did this time. But let's kind of dig into the season as well, like we do normally. So let me get some quick thoughts from you first in terms of how you felt the season went and maybe some of the themes that stood out for you this season compared to previous ones.
So as always, we always try and bring in 4 women and 4 men, and always have a mix of industries. And I felt we really hit the target this year or this season on the kind of caliber that I'm trying to achieve with this podcast series. I think each person that we had epitomizes their industry in a very positive and significant way. And I was very excited to have this combination of people together in one season. So that's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say is just how interesting they all were and how engaged they all were. And, there was not one person that, came to the table unprepared.
One of the interesting ones for me was actually Tariq Noor because he came with a notebook with copious notes. So
Yeah.
it wasn't even just he had prepared and thought through the answers. He actually wrote down a bunch of things that he wanted to make sure he highlighted as he was talking about his life, which was fantastic.
What do people ask you? What are your top 5 pieces of advice to the new ad man or the new people entering the industry? What are your look at your book again?
I knew you would ask me this question, so I had
Look in your
I
book
said
again.
I have to. I wrote something here.
The other person who had done that in the previous season was Ahmed Hekel. So these are 2 titans of their own industry, and they had approached it like schoolboys, coming to their exam. And I found it really endearing and really very, I felt very honored and very privileged that they gave it that much attention.
But preparation, when we talk about that, is they don't approach anything lightly, which is the kind of the subtext there, which is to say, if we're going to do this, it's an interview a podcast. We're going to talk about our life. I want to be considered about it. I want to go back and think about my pivots, and I actually want to reflect on them and share different instances that I think were key in my life, which I think is phenomenal.
But that was the other thing I noticed, which is when I spoke with people of a certain age or who had reached a certain point in their career, like Tariq Noor, like Fadi Randour, like Naveen Tahri, these are people who had scaled the heights and had come out on the other side and were kind of looking back a little bit. Some had retired, some had not, but were still had reached a point where they were able to have a bird's eye perspective. And you felt with those people in particular that there was a sense of contentedness, there was a sense of a fulfilled life, that they had done it on their terms. And everyone has ups and downs, and they all did, but they came out of it with a sense of achievement and peacefulness, which I thought was quite interesting. And then the flip side to that, which I thought was equally interesting, was when we had younger guests. So this season we had Dr. Nadine, who is the founder of Proximy, which is a very innovative online medical platform. And of course, we had Amy Muefi, who is such an integral part of the media scene in Egypt and beyond, and Caroline Luca, who's part of the art world. So these are three women who you feel that they still have a lot to achieve. They're at that point in their careers where in some cases there's a tipping point feeling. In some cases there's just a lot of excitement about their next step and their next challenge, and you can feel that they're hungry for what's going to come next. And that's a very exciting phase to be in, and it's a very exciting thing to listen to as an interviewer. It's contagious, that sense of what's coming next, and I want more, and I can see around the corner.
Yeah, it's like almost saying that, like, maybe 10 years from now, when they're reflecting on their pivots, like,
Yeah,
this is the part that
exactly.
they would talk about
Exactly.
as being pretty significant. In Amy's case, for example, I think the agency model is at a certain place, and therefore I want to do this. And I know 5 years from now, I'm building for that today.
I think, Malak, that every agency, traditional, digital, whatever that you want to call it, we're all living on borrowed time. And I am not willing to be like those people who sat in the room and laughed at the idea of television being dead for advertising because I'm scared. I would rather own it, understand that we are running this agency as passionately as we always have, but I have my backup plan. You know what people are always going to need? They're always going to need the amplification, which is what the media does.
The commonality there amongst a lot of the guests was, as you said, it's the concept of technology being the foundation and the underlying element of a lot of their businesses, a lot of their careers. Three of the guests, I remember clearly, spoke about AI. So Mo obviously is a big AI proponent, but also very aware of how it needs to be harnessed in order for it to
Yeah,
be
he's a thought leader in that space for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then obviously with Carol, we spoke a little bit about the NFT world and digital art, and just how technology is underlying every single thing everyone is doing now. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
You can't escape it. Every industry is now, and obviously Dr. Nadine, her entire company is based on that technology. So that's another observation. It used to be that technology was seen as an addition to a business, and now it's the core platform that everything jumps off from. So
I mean, again, we part of the reason we do this, in addition to kind of just taking a moment to reflect, is also we tend to see some themes happen that are not necessarily planned for, right? So I think one of the things that happened for us in the previous season was we got all of these different views on social media, right? As being, and everybody's kind of love-hate relationship with social media. And then this season, I think the underlying point was technology. And again, a love-hate relationship with technology, to say there is a bit of embracing of it in the case of, let's say, someone like Amy looking at Web3. There is a bit of caution and a bit of nuance when you look at how Caroline Luca was talking about the NFT world and what it comes out in the future. And then you have someone like Mogoda, who's absolutely a thought leader, but also kind of very informed in his take of saying, I think we have to take steps today to reach the world we want to reach. And so everybody kind of kept bringing that up. And I thought actually Tariq Noor's sort of view on AI and actually a little bit on social media and algorithms as well was really interesting, right? Because he was looking at it from a view of like, this is not my world, but I can see what it's doing and the impact it's having.
No, it was definitely an underlying current all the way through, and I'm sure it will continue to be so. I mean, even to the point I think where as we go forward, it won't even be an issue we raise; it will just be a given.
One of the other things, and it kind of ties into this because we used a lot of this content that we're talking about. We used it as part of our bonus content, right? That we're done with our guests. So this was the first season that we tested out a subscription option or a subscription offering, which is basically you get a bunch of bonus episodes. You get a bonus episode of each guest. So a lot of times the conversations you have with the guests, just to share some of the thinking there, involves some stuff about their industry that we get a bit deep into. Not necessarily something maybe we include sometimes in when we think of pivot points. This is something we decided this season to provide as an offering. So if you're a subscriber already, thank you very much. If you're not one, we hope you'll check it out. But every guest has had some bonus content with them, and so AI actually has featured in all of the three that you mentioned. Where we've kind of moved that conversation almost like a fireside chat about their thoughts about different things that are happening in the world.
We did it, originally as a way to grow the business and as a way to grow with the podcast industry in the Middle East. And it was something that you were a big proponent of, Chirag. I've already been a subscriber on other podcasts, so I knew what it meant.
Right.
And I was happy to take a leap of faith. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. And I think it's always very positive. I think we are, at the end of the day, we are part of a relatively new industry in the region. And if I may be so bold, I think we are to some extent leading in the field on a lot of in a lot of ways. So it's only right that we should have jumped in and added the subscription service. In terms of the content, I think it was your call, and I think it was the right call to make the additional content more focused on the nitty gritty of each person's career. Because let's say you're a member of the audience and you've read every book of Mo Gaudat and you just love his story. So getting that extra bonus with more about him is extremely valuable, especially when we've got the material. I mean, my interview with Mo lasted nearly 2 hours. And we went into so much depth about quite a lot of things. And obviously we want to share that with our audience. We want to give them everything that we've collected.
And I would add as well that when you look at something like the subscription as a model that we're doing, and we're always amazed and love the fact that you are listening to the show and you're coming on this journey with us and enjoying what we're doing season by season. But then for those of you who want more, there's more, right? And that's kind of, we're trying to tap into that a little bit better or a little bit more and see what we can do and how we can engage with our listeners even more. So for us, that's where we see that. And so, we're excited to see how that continues, especially now that we know that that's a part of it. And so it changes how we think even as we're going into the episodes.
One thing I was very excited about in this season was that we got a great feature about A&T Media and what I did next and our partnership, Chirag, in Startup Scene, which for those who don't know is a online magazine about the startup world. And they did a very in-depth Q&A with both of us.
Yeah, it was a proper deep dive.
Yeah, it was a real deep dive. It was about my thinking about why I began the business, why I began this particular podcast, and all that sort of background. And we talked about the industry as a whole in the region. We talked about what's coming next for A&T Media in terms of the new offerings we're looking to do. It encapsulated exactly what I'm thinking of and where I believe the industry is going, and our place in it.
Yeah, and I think there was some interesting stuff there as well about kind of looking at the audio world and the podcasting world, like, in comparison to the other aspects of what we call the larger creator economy, which is, of course, video, and there was some talk about radio as well and all of that. It was actually, yeah, it was actually fun to do as an interview as well.
It was a lot of fun. And then, of course, we were thrilled with being recognized by Apple for the second year in a row. They have slightly changed the way they categorize their sort of end of year awards. So in 2021, we were nominated Best of 2021, or among the best of 2021. And then this year, they put us into a category called podcasts that make us think, which I absolutely love. I couldn't have asked for a better category because it's exactly where the space I want to be in, and it's really an honor. And that's in large part due to the fact that we have been able to attract just such high caliber guests, and have really intellectual conversations, meaningful conversations, and it's made people think. It's made, I mean, it's kept me on my toes in every interview, and it's really been quite phenomenal, and we're very, very pleased to end the year this way.
Yeah, and we should also thank each and every one of you who are listening, because you guys are making sure that you're listening to every episode, and that's also ensuring for us, right? Like ultimately, all of these things have a lot to do with sort of the listener response to us in the platforms. So I think it's wonderful and great that we are among the shows that make people think. But then, as we saw, and this came up in the Spotify Wrap thing, which they do as an annual thing as well, that our listeners are enthusiasts, right? They're people who want to, the moment the episode's out, they want to go listen and they want to kind of consume all of it. And I think that that's a testament.
And we want to also just be a bit clear. Spotify does a sort of statistical breakdown for each podcast at the end of every year. And so we got that, which is exactly what you're talking about, Chirag.
Yeah.
And what I was so surprised about was that we have large listenership outside the Middle East.
On Spotify, yeah.
Yeah, on Spotify. So in the UK, in the US, I was floored by that.
Yeah, and again, like you said, I think it's we've been very fortunate with the guests who've agreed to come on and actually share, as we just said a few minutes ago, be very considered and reflective, and looking at their journeys and being honest and sharing insights that I think anybody anywhere in the world would be interested to listen to. And then we've had amazing support from our listeners who are, again, listening on every episode. As you mentioned about social media as well, now we have an engaged community who's responding to the videos we post and things like that as well. And so it's amazing to see this sort of community grow, all of us together, as we continue to program, as we continue to bring, an all new season very soon, and what the response is and how that's going.
I think now is, a natural place to discuss our sponsors. We've been lucky enough to have amazing sponsors since we started. This season, EFG are back with us. They've been with us almost from the beginning. And we also have SODIC, and these are forward-thinking institutions. Podcasting is a new industry, and for these institutions to have decided, well, actually, we want to be in this space, and I'm grateful, obviously. And I think that they're at the entry level of hopefully what will be a big burst in the industry. Positive uptick in more creation of podcasts, and a larger awareness of podcasting. So I think that's a great thing.
You mentioned engaged sponsorship, right? And I think that that's been really interesting as well this season. From the EFG side, we kind of focused the awareness around their EFG Hermes One app, and sort of how they're working to do that. But also, just as interestingly, when we had sort of those initial sit downs with SADC, where we kind of looked at how can we creatively share their message, and that's how this campaign came about, where we actually spoke to the residents who live in their communities and kind of what their experience is like.
Yeah, definitely. I think creatively it's been very exciting, and the fact that SODIC were willing to jump in and do it that way, I thought was really fun. Again, it's a sign of a mature company, a company willing to take risks in an environment that they didn't know well. They don't know podcasting well, but they were willing to take our lead on that, and we made that suggestion, and they ran with it, and it was kind of fun to have an interview within an interview. That's what it was. I mean, we had our main guest, our main guest interview, and then within that, our ad break was a mini interview with a resident from one of the SODIC properties, and it was really fun. And SODIC were able to find people who were in their own right very interesting. So they either had pivots or shifts, and they owned property in different areas around Egypt. So it was a really interesting, nice mix of people. And then, of course, we did a much more in-depth interview with the MD of SODIC, Magued Sherif. I went along and spent a day with him and the marketing team there. And we did quite an in-depth discussion where we talked about his own pivots, his own background, his career, and of course, his vision for SODIC and what's going on with the company.
Yeah, so we're going to actually share a part of that interview now on this episode. So I'm glad to hear that you had a good time. It looked like you had a great time. I saw some of the videos of you guys walking around Alegria and stuff. What did you ask him? Where did you get started?
I actually began by asking him, like I do with all our interviews, when was the last time you did something for the first time?
About 6 years ago, I did my first Ironman race. And for almost 6 hours, I was, questioning, what have I done to myself? Why am I doing this? And since then, it's become an addiction. And I've been doing it like 4 times every year. So I would say running my first Ironman race for the very first time was the last thing I did about 6 years ago.
And where did you do it?
My first race was in Florida. And since then, I've raced in a number of places. So I've raced in, again, Florida, in Cascais in Portugal. I raced in Haugesund in Norway. I raced in Turkey several times. I raced in Abu Dhabi. I raced in Dubai, Oman, Bahrain, and Egypt.
It's quite intense program, Ironman. How do you prepare for something like that?
Until 6 years ago, I was a squash player. I still play, not frequently, as frequent as I used to do, but at one point in time, it was very difficult to find a partner to play against. So I started, switching to something that I can do by myself without having to rely on having someone else around. So I have to train on about 10 times a week, which means that 3 times or 3 days I have to train twice. So I have to train for swimming, for biking, and for running.
And you start preparing several months in advance, obviously.
Well, I train 365 days a year.
Wow.
So I don't skip unless, I'm traveling or unless I'm ill or so, but I have to train 365 days a year. Of course, before any race, there's like a build-up.
Yeah.
So you start building up for a couple of months before any race, but it's something that gets into the system and becomes part. It's a lifestyle.
And is it something you do on your own, or you have a team that you work with, or you have buddies you do it with?
We have a team. We call it Tenacity, and actually SODIC sponsors Tenacity. We have amazing athletes within this group. We all train individually, but normally we do our long bike ride on Friday. So this is when the entire team comes together and we cycle together.
Let's go back in time a little bit. And I would like to talk a little bit about your childhood, but childhood education,
Mm-hmm.
how you decided to study what you studied.
So since I was very young, I always wanted to become an architect. I had an uncle who was an architect, and he was a role model to me. I decided I'm going to become an architect. And I got my ثانوية عامة, and I went into the School of Architecture, Kulliyat Handasa, which is Faculty of Engineering, Cairo University. I graduated 1986 as an architect. And then I felt that my passion is more towards business. So I started, getting somehow into the business side. This is when I decided to go for my MBA, and I got my MBA from the American University in 1998. And since then, it's been, very much on the business side. And of course, I have to admit that the engineering and architecture background has been an asset, because doing what I'm doing right now, which I've been doing for the past since 1997, I've been doing the same thing, real estate development. Having the engineering/architectural background is definitely a plus. And definitely the master's degree that I got was a game changer for me.
And so it complemented what you already had, the basis of the know-how of architecture. You had the complementing of the business on top of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In 2014, I felt it was maybe about time. It wasn't looking very, promising at the time, things in Egypt. So I decided to move to the US. I'm a resident of Florida. My family is there. So I moved to the US, and I was starting a couple of businesses over there. I was there for a year and a half. And this is when Dasha, my predecessor and my friend, called me and said, Magued, I'm leaving. Would you be interested to come back as CEO for SODIC? So although it was very clear to me that I wanted to, continue, and I was starting businesses in the US, but SODIC had a certain sparkle that I couldn't resist.
Yeah, and it had a track record already that was very well known and established.
It had a track record. It had a successful transformation story around 2005 through 2015 when I was approached, and it had a specific, sparkle that I couldn't resist. So there was a formal process. I met the board of directors, and I was appointed as the managing director of the company. I started with SODIC in October of 2015.
Tell me, how is SODIC different to where you worked in other places before? What is the SODIC difference for you?
I always tell my team, and I always tell everyone, that I've been, responsible for other businesses, for big businesses, but I mean, this company is very, very different. This company is an incubator. So when you look at competition all over the place, our people are there. So they are incubated in SODIC, and then they're headhunted by others. We have an amazing culture. It's about ownership. It's about loving what you do. It's about bonding between, no backstabbing. It's all about the business. SODIC has always been a non-family owned business, and until the acquisition that took place a few months ago by Eldar / ADQ, when they acquired 85.5% of the company shares, until then, the biggest shareholder probably owned somewhere around 15%. So it has always been a company that was managed by the management teams, with authority that delegated to them from the board of directors. And it was, always about delegation, about believing in people. And again, it is something that I love to do because I believe in my team. And very rarely that I have to really interfere in anything that they do. They always come back to me seeking, advice, seeking direction. But yes, I am a believer. I never micromanage. Contrary to that, I stay at 30,000 feet. I watch how the business is going. Everybody reports back to me. We're, again, very different from the culture is very different from any other place that I've worked.
I mean, I think as far as I can see, this is how big businesses should be run, where the CEO is very much the big picture man, and the day-to-day gets, run internally by other people.
And I love when everybody gets credit for the work. So I make sure that everyone gets credit, gets the right exposure, gets known by the board of directors, gets known by the shareholders that this person or this lady is doing a fantastic job, and this is where they, get the credits. So I love to see this happening.
So when you joined the company, you said 2015, right?
Yep.
Did you think of 2 or 3 areas that you kind of pinpointed at the time, or you've pinpointed as you've gone along and you say, this is what I'm really concentrating on?
Rebuilding or reconstructing the management team was the major challenge. Having to build a management team for a business as big as such, and a company that has been in the market for 20 years was a very big challenge. And again, we had to go through a number of iterations until we got to homogeneous blending team the team that we have today. That was a challenge that lasted for a few years.
Did you go back to people you had worked with in the past? Did you put out feelers for new people? How did you do that?
No, Malak. My objective was to allow people to grow from within the company, people who have served the company for years, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years, and allow them to grow into positions. So my objective was never to hire someone from outside unless the talent is not present within the company and we are in desperate need to hire. But priority has always been, and when you look at the management team today, I believe all of them had joined the company before I had joined it. So it's talent that was incubated and that grew from within the company into higher positions.
That's interesting because you also get that way your management team feel that they're owning the company themselves.
That's one thing, and you're sending a positive message to everyone inside the company. If you work hard, if you present yourself properly, you have an opportunity to become a very senior executive in the company. So it's a positive message to everyone in the company.
Course.
Another area was, of course, trying to manage a number of shareholders. Historically, SODIC has always sold what they've developed. And we had to build a case that no, there are certain kinds of assets that you need to retain because this is part of placemaking.
Yep.
Not only that they're part of placemaking, but they represent a good source of recurring income. And being traded in the Egyptian stock market, this attracts certain types of investors who can see some sort of a steady stream of income.
And you're building communities and you're creating...
That's part of the placemaking.
Exactly.
So you're building your community.
So these are the 2 areas that you saw as your focus when you began.
Definitely, and this is still actually now that we have Aldar/ADQ as major shareholders. This is somehow bread and butter in what they do. And they are really providing a lot of support to us in building the right platform that supports holding this type of properties and managing them, operating them successfully, of course. So actually, this is some form of a direction that we're getting from our shareholders as well.
And how do you mitigate against the volatility of just the market, what we're in now, for example? Do you have a sort of a crisis team that you rely on? Are there people you turn to?
So first of all, Mark, let me tell you that the market, the Egyptian market, is a very solid market, and it has very strong underlying fundamentals. So it's young population. We believe in. There's a number of things that we can talk about, but it's a very solid market, a very solid sector, very strong underlying fundamentals. And it never dies. We've seen fantastic results, not only by SODIC, but by other reputable serious developers who have been in the market for years as well, which we have lots of respect to as well. So the market continues to perform very well during very challenging times, during COVID-19, during devaluation. And we still are experiencing, growth in the market in general, in our market share as well. So yes, there are challenges, but the market sometimes gets sick. But it's a very strong market.
I think also COVID-19 might have actually almost been a lot of businesses suffered, but your residential projects might have almost had a boost, because people who were still living in the center of town suddenly realized they couldn't take it anymore and decided to move. A lot of people I know did
Very
that.
true. That's very
And
true.
did you see an uptick
Yes,
in?
yes, and we could see it in resale as well.
Yeah.
Because we have visibility of the number of transactions that happen within our community, our communities. So we could see how people were so anxious to move out of the city, because I mean, living in a community, a gated community like SODIC West or any of its sub-developments, the beauty of being able to park your car, being able to walk down the streets. You want to cycle at times of curfew. That was a blessing. You're getting all the services through our facility management arm, our wholly owned subsidiary Idara. You have access. Once the clubs were allowed to open, you have access to your sports facilities, to some form of social life. I mean, this is something that it was a real blessing, and we could see that people who lived a different quality of life, being part of a community as such, they had some form of impact on others, and we could see how people, some form of a hype was created. People want to move into a gated community.
We're doing these small interviews with residents of SODIC properties. Some of them live in Alegria, work at Polygon, and own a property on the North Coast. So they're completely embedded in the SODIC atmosphere. And they were saying how the COVID time was seamless for them, because they just carried on with their lives normally, their children.
Very true.
And it's quite a blessing to have that.
So you have the schools, you have the medical facilities, you have the office park, you have the clubs, you have it all.
Yeah.
You can live without having to move out.
Exactly.
I cannot promise you the sea here. You cannot promise you the beach, but the beach is
it's
200 kilometers away.
Exactly. I want to go back for a moment and maybe identify another area in the last 18 months you were very involved in, which is the acquisition by Eldar. Tell me a little bit about how that came about, and then the final announcement, if you like.
I guess it all started actually before that, maybe a year before, when I was introduced to Eldar CEO and the management team, and at the time they were looking at Egypt and looking at different options or alternatives of tapping into the Egyptian market. So at the time, the discussion was about doing something together. Maybe we can co-develop something. And we started helping them, studying some of their projects. I personally was involved. Some of my team members were also involved in this exercise. And then COVID-19 hit. So everything was, stopped.
The process began before COVID, that. I see.
Before COVID-19.
Okay.
So it was a sort of an introduction at the time with a different agenda. And then they came back and said, well, we like the company, we like the management team, and we would like to, elevate the game. And rather than just, doing something together, actually we want to place an offer on the company and try to acquire the company. They presented submitted what they called the MBO. And then we went into due diligence. It was a very lengthy process. People sometimes had to stay in the office. My team working 3-4 days non-stop to deliver all the requirements on time. And I believe that because everyone left a very positive impression on Eldar. When the acquisition happened, I believe it was in December of 2021, after 7 months of very tough, very structured due diligence, having to deal with very specialized consultants. I mean, they loved what they saw, so they decided to proceed, and they submitted their MTO.
And how have things changed since then? Have they got a vision, a special vision that they wanted to bring into for SODIC, or were you carrying on as you had been before?
We're building on what we had before, but because they believe strongly and highly of the potential in the Egyptian market, they come and think of Egypt as a vehicle they have aggressive plans to grow.
So that brings us to the end of this wrap up of season 4. It also brings us to the end of the year. So any last notes from you, Malak?
Yeah, I just want to, as always, thank our audience who are so engaged, and I'm glad that the show is resonating with them. I'm very, very happy about that. I also just want to do a shout out to our social media team, actually, Chirag, because they really are integral to our work, and they're really doing a phenomenal job. So that's another thing I wanted to say. And then just in closing, I just want to remind everyone that we are going to take a little bit of a break now, and we should be back early March. In the meantime, you can follow our news. We're going to be doing a lot of clips on previous episodes, some montages, some really fun stuff coming up in the next couple of months. And you can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. And I wish everyone a happy new year, and see you in 2023.
Yes, Happy New Year.